Well, aloha everyone, and welcome to the very first series, this kickoff for our Share the Joy Talk Story Time. I am super excited today. We have a great presenter with us, our very own Dr. Jim Krause, who is the professor of English at Chaminade University. He is also the professor now of Chaminade's first surf studies course, and he is a lifelong soul surfer, a great man. He's had extensive history and experience with the surfing scene here on the island, was actually editor of the magazine Hawaii Surf and Sea, and a very talented poet and journalist as well. And so without too much further ado, I forgot, I'm going to offer a quick prayer before I get to Jim here. I'm going to offer a quick prayer to ask God's blessing over our time together. So if we can, as we begin this new year, as we begin this series and the new semester, we just ask God's blessing. So let us pray. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Dear Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for your wonderful creation, the gift of life, the life that we find all around us, whether it be here on these beautiful islands of Hawaii or wherever we may be. God, you have given us so much to enjoy in your creation. We ask that during this time, you give us time to reflect, to share, and think more deeply on this beautiful gift that is the ocean, that is the wave, and what surfers hear and know. May you continue to watch over us in this new year, that 2020 will continue to have blessings, abundant blessings in our lives and for our entire world, and help us to share those blessings with those around us. We ask all this through the intercession of our Blessed Virgin Mary, Father Chaminade, and all the saints and angels, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. Well, again, a great man that we have with us today, kicking us off for our first Share the Joy series. With no further ado, Dr. Jim Krause.
Thanks so much, Jeremiah, for organizing this. And I hope what I have to say, my reminiscences and storytelling here, I hope they ring true for someone at least. I've always been a fan of the now deceased Big Island artist, Dietrich Varese. And so I thought I would start just by showing this wonderful silver sword image he created. Bear with me, I'm a little awkward here with these images there. There's another one of his. This one gets a little more to the theme of what I want to get at here, which has to do with traditional Hawaiian surfing and maybe trying to draw some lines between surfing as it's kind of known and marketed to the world and surfing as it's evolved here in the Hawaiian Islands. It seems to me they're related things, but they're quite different things if we start thinking about it very much. So to begin with, what we know about surfing when the first Westerners came really isn't much. And it was an interesting book that came out last year about sharks and surfing. And the shark part of it aside, the author was very interested in the Captain Cook collection at the British Museum. And apparently she had a conversation with the archivist there who was in charge of Cook's diaries, journals, logs, and such. And the archivist said the strangest thing. He said, the reason Captain Cook was killed is because he didn't know how to surf. Well, that's a jumping off place if I've ever heard one. And so the author of this book goes on to explain that in a bit more detail, which is, to make it simple, that when you look at Cook's diaries, there really is no account at all of people surfing. However, if you look at the diaries of other people on his ship who were keeping logs and diaries, there is much more full account of what was going on. So I'll leave that little story, with high recommendations for this little beautiful little book that came out of a small press in Berlin. Sternberg Press is the name of it, and it's just called Sharks, Surfers, Death, I think is the name of it. I could go on and on about this little fascinating book, but I'll stop with that for now. So what I'm trying to unpackage here, though, is the idea of the wave as a source of joy. And when I started thinking about this, after I'd not really ever approached the idea of joy in surfing directly. I mean, it is something every surfer knows and aspires to, and there's certainly always the pull of the surfer. But to try to unpackage that led me down some interesting pathways. So let me see if I can take you down one of those now. I feel it's hard to really explore what joy is without recognizing that at some point joy is a pursuit, it's a process, and that it's always in some sense encumbered by, surrounded by its opposite, which you might call despair. I prefer the term abjection because it's a little more resonant with some other ideas that I like to think about. Because abjection gets more to the heart of our feeling about our day-to-day experience when it's not leading us where we really want to go. It's that feeling of despair, of being pulled into something that you really want to get out of. And there's no question that for surfers, that the pull of the wave, the sound of the waves, it represents a pull away from abjection. The irony, of course, is that the wave contains its own capacity for throwing one into the abyss of abjection. It's unrelenting. The wave is, the ocean is. I lived on the beach on the North Shore for many years, and I mean, literally on the beach. I lived on a little rock promontory near the surf break Chun's Reef. If you know that area, there's a little rock promontory between Chun's Reef and Laniakea, and a row of houses there. But the point is that if you were living in one of those houses, you were basically at sea. Only you didn't have the rocking back and forth you would have if you were on a ship or something. But day and night, there was the sound of the ocean and the sound of the waves. And after a couple of years in that house, I got to where I could, I knew pretty much exactly what the surf was like without ever seeing it. And of course, that sound no doubt affected my dreaming, my sense of where the next day was going to go and how it was going to go, and all of that. And so the sound of the waves, the voice of the waves, as I'm getting at in the title of this little presentation, is really central part of that desire that pulls one into whatever lies in front of us. I think we hear things perhaps even before we see things. That's a big generalization, and I'm not sure I want to try to defend that idea. But internally, in our own minds, I really think it is true that we do hear our own words and our own thoughts before we are able to act on them. And I've got a word for that, and it's popping up in some of the literature about surfing. Oh, I should digress a little bit here, is that one of the fascinating discoveries I've made as a surfer and as an academic in the past few years, because it's been a few years now that we've been talking about a surf studies program at Chaminade. And I have to thank Lance here and everyone who's been really very supportive of the idea of taking this on. But one of the astounding things is how much academic work has gone on in this area. And frankly, unbeknownst to me, because all of these years I've been a practicing poet and teacher, and I've not written about surfing in directly, at least, in many years, and certainly haven't until the past year or so explored it as an academic pursuit. But I've been very happy to see the amount of scholarship that's going on all over the world in all aspects of surfing. Everything from ecotourism and legal, law school journal. We turned up with a long, incredibly detailed article about the ownership of the wave. Surfers all know that when you're in a surfing area and you're kind of maneuvering or trying to get in a good position to catch the wave that no one else, by all accounts, should be taking, that at some point the wave becomes yours. It's your wave, you own it. Well, pretty obviously, this can lead to disputes, conflicts of all sorts. And I want to go into that from a couple of different angles here, but the law school journal was trying to approach it from a purely legal view that was going to end up with the idea of needing to create a legal infrastructure for excluding certain kinds of surfing from certain places, or limiting the number of surfers in a certain place in order to reduce the amount of conflict. So there's, like I said, a lot of scholarship going on, but that's one particular area that I'm fascinated with, because as a surfer who, one of the great pursuits of any surfer is to try to find the wave to yourself. And by some lights, this is more or less the definition of the quote soul surfer. And soul, there's a little bit of a pun on that, I'm sure, because every surfer wants to be the sole rider of the wave. But these days it's a rare event that would allow you to be in the surfing zone. I'm trying to get the Hawaiian words mixed in here a little bit. Poina nalu would be the Hawaiian phrase for the surf zone. It would be very difficult to get out there in the surf zone in the Poina nalu without some sense of having to, we would say at best, negotiate or maybe compete for a position of ownership of the wave. So you can file that idea away a little bit here, but it is something I'm going to round back to in a little bit. This idea of owning the wave. When we start thinking about different forms of joy, perhaps, sorry about that. That may happen from time to time because I haven't figured out how to turn off my notifications on my iPhone, which is where I've got these wonderful photos to share with you. And there's one, another digression, one of many. What you see on the outside wave are two whales, humpback whales surfing the wave. What an experience that would be. Be there watching that, I suppose. When we talk about the sounds of the ocean, I have to say that one of the most profound experiences I've had was to be swimming in the summer on a calm day at Waimea Bay and going underwater and hearing the bellowing or lowing of the whales offshore. We didn't even see them, but I could certainly hear them underwater. My daughter just a little while ago was reminding me that the loudest noise, the loudest sounds recorded from any mammal are from whales. I didn't know that, but that's why they apparently can be heard. They can hear one another from across huge distances. So there's, well, here again, a technological glitch, but I'm going to let it pause there. This is a very short video clip that I'm going to ask you to imagine the face of the wave, that little wave that's looming up there in front of you. If someday you see me with my iPhone or around, you can say, play that video for me, because what I would want you to hear is a crashing sound when that little section of the wave pops over and hits the water in front of itself. By the way, the series of photos that I'm going to take you through here as the talk progresses were taken on Father's Day this past year when my daughter and I drove out to Yokohama Bay, or Keawe'ula Beach, as it should be known. Because when I was young, I used to surf here a lot, and it's actually quite a dangerous spot. If I'd only known when I was young how dangerous it was. But in any case, we had a lot of fun there. My brother and my friends and I, surfing at this spot, and I'll tell you more about that as we progress. But I was just on a sort of reminiscence, I guess, on Father's Day to go out there and with my daughter and look around and take a bunch of photographs and videos. That's looking north at that. If you've never been out to this beach, you have to go looking south there. There's a lifeguard tower there. But in the distance where that headland in the foreground meets the ocean, the road basically is blocked off there, and you have to walk into the beach there. If you were to keep walking past the beach, it goes all the way to kind of Point, and then around all the way back to the end of Farrington Highway over by Mokuleia. So some people like to walk to Kaena Point starting on this side of the island, and some people will drive the other way. But it's a great walk, and if you haven't been out to Kaena Point, you must do it someday. There were no lifeguards there in the 1960s. You can imagine crashing sounds here. And one of the lifeguards picked his board up and decided to paddle out. And you can't see what's underwater here, but he knows this reef awfully well, because that is an incredibly shallow spot he's paddling over. And in the old days, we would never go right over that reef. It was just too shallow. These days, everyone goes right. Things have changed. There's another west side, because, by the way, Yokohama's on the west side of the island, and you might think, oh, it's on the northerly part of the west side, so it must be good for north, swells, but it's not so. It's a south swell break. It breaks in the summer. And so whenever you hear there's a big south swell coming in, when Waikiki and Ala Moana are at their best, some people would still say, oh, this is the secret spot to go to, but fair warning, it's a heavy hitting spot. So next slide here. Here's a little clip of what actually goes on there. Late takeoff, he turns up, and the wave breaks very suddenly there, and then all of a sudden he's on the beach, and notice that backwash that hits right there. It's rugged, because where that backwash looms up, there's boulders. It's an old stream bed that's covered with sand until you get to the water. And after that, it's just a bunch of boulders. Very shallow, very dangerous. And the other thing is, because of the shallowness and how close it is to the beach, there's a lot of backwash. And the backwash for the non-surfers is the wave, after the wave washes up on the beach, the gravity pulls it back out, and it creates a little wave going back out. And when the wave going out, it's the wave coming in, you have the backwash, and sometimes it's quite a spectacular collision of waves there. I was actually kind of moved in another direction when I was out there listening to the waves. Here's a little clip of a bodyboarder. Watch what happens right now. It looked so easy up until that point, but it's a rugged ride. He doesn't hold on for much longer here. And yeah, there are a few more like that. While I was there at the beach that day, Father's Day, I got to thinking, and I decided I wanted to write a poem about it. And so I'm going to read the poem. I didn't tell anyone this was going to be in part a poetry reading, because I thought maybe no one would come if that was the case. But But in any case, this is a poem. Actually, it's going to appear. It's going to be published next month. And the poem's called Multi-Faced Wave. Steep beach, river mouth filled with boulders, inshore, refractory, reef break, backwash, surfers rising and falling with the passing swells. From Latin, radiare, quote, to emit energy of any kind in the form of rays, waves, or subatomic particles. Case study, exposure. Radium, how could she not have known? Madame Curie, her science glowing green. Radon, alpha radiation in the basement. Oinanalu, surf zone, reef break, backwash, wave meets wave, colliding, refracting. There are many phases at Yokohama Bay, Keawaula, or from Runit Island, Marshall Islands. The sure word, the precise word, it's inshore thrusting. Blue, white, 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 ash. Ah, this radical. Then no beach at all. The invisible waves, alpha, beta, gamma, half alive, radiating over the sea surface, the vast Ho'ina Kai. So that took me a long way from Yokohama Bay to the experience of the Marshall Islands, which is roughly out in that direction. I don't have a lot of poems, so don't worry. I mean, I have a lot, but not a lot to read today. So, okay, so let's get back to the joy part of this. That was a pretty gloomy poem, in a way, at least the ending of it, reminding us about the nuclear holocaust in a way that the Marshall Islands have had to live through, and the radiation exposure they're still enduring there. But let's put all of that aside. That's part of the abjection part of this formula that we're concerned with. So let's think about play for a minute, maybe more than a minute, because I think when any of us go surfing, that's much of what's on our mind. And play on the surface seems like an escape, retreat from reality, certainly contrary to all of our notions of what the work ethic is. We all know we need to play, we need to train our children to play, but somehow it's just a little beyond us a lot of the times to really understand what it is and why we need to do it. So here's a quotation. This is from the writer Johann Huizinga, who wrote a wonderful book called Homo Ludens, in which he basically argues that play is central to our humanity. So here we get to the core of it. In play, we may move below the level of the serious, as the child does, but we can also move above it in the realm of the beautiful and the sacred. So what is this about the sacred? Well, there's another poem. I'm not going to read this one, but I'll talk about it a little bit. But it's a poem about the origins of waves. And I got interested in the origins of early English seamen talking about storms at sea, particularly. There's something that mariners know about, the Beaufort scale, where one can basically tell the wind speed by looking at the surface of the ocean. So the poem's about a reflection on, well, what is it that makes waves? It's ultimately that wind out there somewhere in the far distant ocean that's swirling and generating enough energy over the surface of the ocean to create these waves. But the early writers were also concerned with where does the wind begin? How did the storm occur? And so the idea began to emerge, and I think is still worth thinking about and considering, is that those winds, and ultimately the waves that the winds generate, are messages from God. Let that sink in for a minute. That basic idea that we can look at nature and see God in nature is really central to a lot of thinking, and through all time. And we could say, well, the whole appearance of God in natural forms, anything from tablets on a mountaintop to burning bushes and such, suggest to us that it's our experience in nature ultimately that's going to allow us to hear, speak. How interesting that it might be in a playful state that we would hear it. So what is it that we're trying to hear? I mean, I could, sort of metaphorically here, as I'm suggesting, make the claim that you can believe it or not, that that sound the waves makes the voice of God talking to us. It's kind of hard to get your mind around, and I'm not going to ask you to go too far down that thought path, but consider this: that whatever language God's speaking to us in or with is not something that is like English. We have to make that translation ourselves out of our own experience. And so, with a nod to the linguistics folks that are present, at least one of them, I want to talk a little bit about semiotics here. Now, semiotics is that part of linguistics that has to do with the origins of language in the human mind. And there's a point of origin in our thinking that the psycholinguistics like to orient us to, and it's something they call the thetic moment. And it's the moment we begin to be aware that there's an idea that we might want to articulate. So the short version of that, it's that I have it on the tip of my tongue, but what is it? I don't quite know what it is. Ah, there it is. But it's that moment before, just before you have the word that you're always trying to chase down. So there's a point in surfing that's very much like that, I think. And it's not so much a matter of listening as if you're trying to listen for some message in the waves. It's a matter of how your body responds to that, as if to say, it's not with our ears that we listen, it's with our whole bodies. And so I'd like to attach to that idea of the thetic moment another idea that I've been reading about recently in our new scholarship of surfing, which actually is the book I'm going to mention now is actually about surfing and skateboarding. It's a fascinating book where the author, actually, the subtitle of the book is Board Motility. So there's the word, motility. So you can look it up if you want, but I'll spare you. I'll save you some time. And just to say, motility is actually a word that comes out to us from biology, and it has to do with the capacity of an organism for motion, move. And so the author of this book on surfing and skateboarding is saying, well, this is something we have to pay attention to in these sorts of sports or human activities, these forms of play, where the human body is moving in response to situations that that it has moved itself into. And so the idea of motility is about that moment before we take action, before our body moves one way or the other. And in surfing, as in skateboarding and skiing, and probably a lot of sports particularly, and maybe we could extrapolate from sports, much of human activity, this idea of some will to action, this need to move in response to what we're seeing or hearing, is what connects us. to the world and to one another. We could hear a picture, which reminds me I should probably change the image in front of us about this point. Yeah, here's some motility for you. This is a nice little wave, short one. And by the way, I think in the earlier slide, there was a guy paddling out. Remember, I think it was that guy who you just saw on the wave here. I almost run someone over. He's about to get caught up in that shore break problem at the other end. And while I was there, I did see some lifeguards go down to that part of the beach. Someone had gotten bumped on the rocks, I'm sure. And there's a big set wave at Yokohama. So back to motility. So is it possible that in our search for meaning, our search for God, our search for being whole, that we find that in our sense of connectedness, and we find it also in our connectedness to the wave, particularly? So there's another book I want to mention, and it's a book of philosophy. A practicing philosopher at UC Santa Barbara, Aaron James, has written a book called Surfing with Sartre. And I saw the title and I said, I got to get that one. That's got to be full of good stuff for me. And he unpackages this, and I'll have to credit Aaron James with the second part of the title for this little discussion we're having now, What Surfers Know, because the first chapter of his book is titled What Surfers Know. So he goes at this, though, with the idea of attunement, that what makes us feel whole and connected to one another and connected to nature and connected to God is a sense of attunement. And I want to connect that to, as he does as well, as James does as well, to the idea of adaptation. I know we're much concerned with adaptation and change among our Marianist ideas that we're talking about increasingly these days at Chaminade. And adaptation and change is a big, big part of that discussion. But I think here in the idea of adaptive attunement, which is what James writes about, we have something we can really hang our hats on, so to speak, because we have to adapt to our surroundings, and we adapt by tuning ourselves to them. And there are all sorts of conflicts that are possible out of this, and we have to live through them. We have to find our points of reconciliation, if you will. Another idea for this adaptive attunement that James uses that I like a lot is flow. Flow. I think everyone gets that. The word implies so much to us, and such an important word, but it does have everything to do with adaptive attunement, how one adapts intuitively at the level of what precedes language that is purely, in a sense, visceral, the way we attune ourselves to what's going on around us in a moment-to-moment situation. So I'm kind of drawing to the end. Let me go through some more slides for you here. A lot of Yokohama there. So there's a lifeguard attending to someone down at the other end of the beach. And then, yeah, there, I got the lifeguards going back to the lifeguard tower. So there. Such a beautiful shoreline out there when you get these various headlands and valleys stacked up against one another. So here at the end, I want to play this video. Well, we have problems with the sound, so I'm going to narrate this a little bit. This is from you can look this up on YouTube if you want, Board Stories episode. It's a clip from one of their episodes, and it's about a surfer from the Big Island who rides a traditional Alaia surfboard. And they have his voiceover. Unfortunately, you have to chase this down on YouTube to hear it, because unfortunately, we were trying to get the sound to work, and there was so much feedback in the way I rather recklessly set this up. But Uluboy, as he's known, Hawaiian, who's at this point talking about how important it is for him to be connected to to his ancestors through this, and just but the jumping off place for us in this conversation we're having, well, it's not quite a conversation yet, but I hope it becomes one. But the jumping off place is literally his jumping off place at that moment you just saw, where he is now entering into the place of his ancestors, as he's describing it when you hear the voiceover. And here's what it looks like to ride an alaia. There's no fin on this board. And a lot of modern surfers would think, how in the world can you surf without a fin? That's what it looks like. As he's describing it in his voiceover, he says it's like surfing with nothing holding you back. It's pure flow, and he feels spiritually connected to what he's doing because of that. It's not just because it's the way his ancestors surfed. It's because of the physical sense of what he's doing, his sense of attunement, that leads him back to this feeling of what his ancestors must have had. So this fellow surfs on the big World Surfing League circuit, but this is, when he talks about doing this, he said this is really where it's at for him. Before watching this video, I mean, I'd seen actually some people riding alaia before, but most of our old our images of surfers before fins went onto surfboards, which, by the way, was roughly in the late 1940s. Surfboards did not have fins at all, but most of them were not exactly alaia like what he has here. They were redwood planks, much longer and much heavier than this, and for the most part, they were going straight off. At least most of our old photos of people surfing in Waikiki would have us believe that. I got in quite an argument with a friend of mine some years ago about whether in the 1930s and before, surfers who had no fins were able to do maneuvers, anything close to what we can do now. And my friend argued that they could, and I would say, no, we don't have any evidence. And actually wrote a little article about defending my position. Well, I was wrong, and I'll admit it. Not the first thing I've been wrong about. Okay, I think that's the last of the video clips there. But I want to sort of end here with, I got to stop this. I do want to end by getting back to the idea of adaptation and change, and suggest that that it's a little different in the surf than in the broader social frame of reference. At least we would think it is on the surface, right? Because when we talk about social change and adaptation, oftentimes those conversations are, I think, maybe loaded, I should say fraught, perhaps, with ideas that have to do with assimilation. Because when we talk about assimilation, like one culture meeting another culture and people having to live together, there's this idea of assimilation is that maybe one of those cultures is giving ground to the other, and there's some sort of power play going on. Well, we'll leave that discussion for another time, except that one of the texts we're using in the surf studies course this semester is written by a fellow Isaiah Walker, who teaches history out at BYU in Laie, who's a surfer, and wrote a book that's being much talked about among historians and cultural workers and cultural historians who are interested in surfing and all. It's called Waves of Resistance, and it's basically the history of surfing as it was emerging or re-emerging to become modern surfing as we know it. There was a long period where the received knowledge about surfing history was that, well, surfing died out because the missionaries came and made it bad. And missionaries were particularly unhappy that people would go surfing instead of going to church. And so that, and for other reasons, the story goes, is that surfing died out through much of the 19th century. Well, the problem with that story is that it neglects to mention that Western introduced diseases were ravaging the Hawaiian population during that period. And that, as in the past decade or so, we've begun to have many English translations of 19th century Hawaiian journalism. We're finding many accounts of surfing during the 19th century. So we know surfing was going on through that whole period. But what Walker writes about is that in the period of the late 19th century, when Westerners were beginning to go to Waikiki and learn to surf, that at that time, Hawaiians were very much excluded in many ways. They were not excluded from the surfing area, and that's really the point of Walker's book, was that the Po'ina Nalu, the surfing area itself, was a place where Hawaiians would dominate. They had control of that area in ways that they had lost control of their lives and their land itself. So I won't go on about that, except that Walker takes that basic problem of not just that there is conflict in the Po'ina Nalu, in the surfing zone, but that conflict is a kind of reflection of what's going on the shore. It's a reflection because things are flipped, right? The power structure on shore is different from the power structure in the Po'ina Nalu. So, okay, I'm promising to stop at about this point. But I want to give you a quotation from a surfer, another deceased surfer named Rel's son. And this is a quotation she gave to me back in the 1970s when I was writing an article about women's surfing and the struggles women were having entering into the competitive surfing scene. And Rel's son was one of the surfers in that period who was really quite competitive and willing to talk about the problems women faced. There was no prize money involved for women in those days. And but she was, just as an aside, talking about the fact that she liked to go surfing in the morning because there were no crowds there. And here's a quote which I think is worth holding on to. She says, "Everyone wants to see their reflection in the face of the wave." And of course, that's what she's getting at there, is that, well, if everyone wants to see the reflection in the face of the wave, then there's no space on the wave for me to see my reflection. Okay, so that's a little bit of an allusion to the whole idea that what we're seeking as we look at the wave, as we listen to the surf, as we paddle out to it or swim out to it, that there is a sense that it's a personal experience. It's an individual thing that we're looking for. Yet, as Walker argues, it's a social issue too. And there is a lot of conflict that comes along with it. Well, I'll stop with that, and I hope I'm close to the right time here. 20 minutes, I think, was about where I'm supposed to be. So I'm open for comments or questions at this point.
Well, mahalo, Dr. Kraus, so far for awesome, very interesting, and a subject that we could talk definitely at length. And but this next section here, we just want to be able to open it up for anyone to ask some questions. We do have a couple of questions here coming through in our some direct message, but questions from the group. But I'll just open it up first of all to anyone that would like to ask a question directly for all of us to hear and Dr. Kraus to expand upon. So let's do that first, and then if we don't have any to say verbally or audibly right now, then I'll turn over to our questions that were sent over. But please, this is a dialogue. Anyone?
I want to make a comment. Having been a surfing finless craft for a long, long time now, prior to the invention of I guess, steam engines, the fastest humans were moving would have been Polynesians on their finless boards. It's remarkable how fast those things can go.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to unpackage about surfing's origins and what we don't know yet about what early surfers were doing and earlier cultures were doing relative to the ocean. I mean, I think the part of my talk where I was touching on this a little bit was this whole picture of Captain Cook sitting there at Kealakekua Bay on his ship and apparently not even quite noticing what was going on there in front of him.
I think the first Western and first written and thus Western description of waves being ridden was one of the early the pre-French. What was the guy's name? It was before Cook, and the stop was Tahiti, and somebody amongst the officer crew was writing down, there was a guy out by the entrance, he obviously at a reef pass, a guy in a canoe, and he would catch a wave and ride it in, and then he'd go right back out and do it again. And the fact, the European finally realized that this guy was playing, and I think it's the first written description of wave riding, but yeah. It took a little while, but the guy finally realized that this was play. But it was a canoe.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things that comes up in the whole field of surf studies, because surfing's being practiced all over the world now, really. It's amazing how explosive it is. But one of the things that's coming up has to do with the anthropological aspects of this. In other words, the deep history of where did surfing begin? Where was it done first? And Tahiti rightfully has a story to tell there. The Peruvians have stories to tell as well. And certainly we have a good one here in Hawaii. But one of the things I'm trying to stress in the approach to surf studies generally is that every place, every surfer has his or her own origin story about how surfing started at that place or how it started for them personally. And I think those are the stories that really matter, although the anthropology can inform that in some important ways. And by the way, canoe surfing, wow, did anyone else see the clips of the guys at Waimea Bay just about a month ago, riding a 4-man canoe on 20-foot Waimea Bay waves? It's really amazing. I have the clip, by the way. I don't have it on my computer, but email me if you want to see that. Randy, I know if you're still on, I know you told me last time we talked that you were doing some canoe surfing, and when that happened, I thought I better get Randy connected to that clip. It's really amazing.
I thought that was Randy in that 4-man.
Now, Randy, are you there?
Hey, Jim, I had just a quick comment and a question. I have to apologize. I had to step away for a phone call, so you may have already addressed this, but I appreciated when you were sort of getting at the joy of surfing, and I identified a lot with what you were saying. This sort of attunement, flow, being a part of this, this natural environment. Perhaps you've already spoken to this, but if you haven't, could you speak to kind of the antithesis of that, which is sort of the chaos and the danger and the joy I get as a still very novice surfer, surviving and not hurting myself, making it through a wave. There's a joy that comes through the humility of being a part of this, incredible power, and not, maybe not being attuned with it, but not, not falling victim to some of its more savage implications. Again, perhaps you had addressed it, but if you didn't, could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you nudged me in this direction, Lance, because I had actually wanted to say something about that, and but it never made it into my notes, I guess. But years ago, I was interviewing a big wave surfer named Fred Van Dyke, and wrote an article based on that interview, which I spent an undue amount of time in the past week looking for. Could not turn it up. I did find an article he'd written for me when I was publishing the magazine. And I thought maybe the quote's in there. But here's the idea that he told me, because the question I put to him was, well, what part of the surfing experience is most important to you? And he went right to this question you're getting at, Lance, which is, he said, after a really bad hold down on a big wave, that first breath of air. The point beyond which you really don't think you're going to make it back to the surface. And then suddenly you're there and you're pushing the foam out of the way and you're taking a breath of air. And it's not every surfer is going to get to that point, and no surfer wants to get to that point. But that sense of total relief and total deliverance, I guess, from that. And I did go into this part of it earlier, which is that on the counterpoint, the psychological counterpoint to joy and all of this attunement, the feeling of oneness and all that. The counterpoint to that is abjection and the fear that goes along with it. Now, in literature, particularly, at least going back to the 19th century, maybe before that even, in literature, we would refer to this as the sublime. The sublime experience was the experience that that you had, that was awe. You can't believe how big those waves are, or how powerful they are, or what incredible fierce sounds they make, and recognize at the same time that there's beauty in that. And since part of our title here today is the voice, has to do with the voice of the wave, the joyful voice of the wave, as I was getting ready for this, I kept thinking about the strangest sounds I've heard from waves. And I know there was one experience I had years ago, and I was riding a wave at the break called Laniakea, and it was a good day, and it was a sizable wave. And after I got to the bottom of the wave and started moving up across it, I could hear the wave kind of catching up to me from behind. And of course, it's not something you look back toward. You just want to get away from it. But it had the sound of two ships colliding, just a metallic sound, just crashing, snapping, scraping sound. And if you ever get a chance to talk to Kai Linne or any of these people who are writing Jaws or Nazare, ask them what they're hearing. Ask them what it sounds like. And some of these GoPro videos that come up, I know Kai Linne had one recently at his big wipeout at Nazare. Then he had his GoPro with him. And you see him in the wipeout, and he says this was the worst wipeout ever. And this is from the guy who's sort of at the cutting edge of big wave surfing these days. And the GoPro can't capture it. It just cannot come close to the sounds that wave had to have been making, And the other part of this, if we talk about the other side of the joyful experience in surfing, the other side is a social one that has to do with crowds and conflicted situations, people competing for ownership of the wave and so on. I told the story earlier today. I hope I wasn't to anyone who's already on this, but years ago I was substitute teaching in a high school, and in fact it was a high school I went to, and And I was showing a film as was instructed. I mean, I was instructed to fill, as a substitute, show the film. And a boy comes and opens the door near the screen, and light comes in and we can't see it. So I go over to the door and say, well, we have to close the door. And the boy instantly gets mad at me and slams the door on me, and I fall down. And so I send a student off to the vice principal and realize I probably made an enemy for life now because this boy is going to hate me for sending him to the vice principal for it. A couple of weeks later, I was surfing, and there he is in the surf break. And I thought, this is going to be not so good, I think. And I started worrying a little bit that I would take off in front of him or he would take off in front of me, and there would be a conflict. And sure enough, he took off in front of me in a wave. And at that point, I'm not thinking about, well, I should just kick out so there's no conflict. But some other sort of hormones kick in, and I surf up right below him and basically try to push him off the wave, not physically, but with the board to sort of push him up higher on the wave so he has to go up. But instead of going off the wave, he basically intentionally falls off and falls onto my board, and we both go underwater and get tumbled around, and our leashes are entangled, and we come up, and I'm thinking already, this is not going to end well. But when we come up, he smiles at me, he's laughing, and we became good friends after that. Good, fast friends for many years. I'd see him surfing. We'd always have a good laugh over it.
I'm going to try that, Jim.
Yeah, try it. Well, there's another story I have about the voice of the waves. When I was young, we would paddle out, and a lot of times people don't realize how much wading surfers do. There was a little clip in the shots I was showing earlier of surfers just sitting there, rising and falling on the waves. Well, as any surfer knows, you can spend a lot of time out there waiting, and if you're an impatient kind of person who needs to go to work or something, that could be a real turnoff. So my friends and I decided we were going to become just a little superstitious, and we got the idea that if we called out the name of a surf goddess, we might be able to summon the waves up. And so then the question got to be, what would the surf goddess's name be? And the name we settled on was Mabel, because it sounded like maybe there's a wave coming, so we called her Mabel. And after a while, it got to be that it was a very common thing for surfers when they got bored would start calling out Mabel, Mabel. If you call it out long enough, a wave will come. I think that has to do with the vocalizing in the surf and the surf responding with a wave.
In describing surfing to people who know nothing about it, it's much more like hunting than it is like tennis. I mean, there's a lot of downtime and a lot of searching. Whether you should paddle over to an adjacent peak or further in, but it's hunting, I think, is a reasonable comparison.
Well, I've got another poem that relates to that, Hank. I promise not to read any more, but this one relates. It's called Outermost Sport. The throwing down of teeth on a moving game field, a court with its ancient wagers, motility scaled in steps across the swollen stage. Intention, the trio, wave, reef, dancer, and who knows, windsong dancing to hourglass movements, lunar, tidal. Extension, the pivot, the upturned lip, its curvature, eel wave, fielding the shoreline stadium, tide pool reflections bathing in windless glissando. Scores are in, the judgment, playful and somewhat musical, blue lines turned white. So that's not intended to be a direct put down of competitive surfing with all of its scoring and hyper aggressiveness and I guess toxic masculinity. That's another stone we could throw at competitive big wave surfing, particularly, you know. But and these are ideas that we're going to unpack a bit in the surfing class, the surf studies class. By the way,
Krause.
if anyone's interested in sitting in or auditing the course, send me an email. We've got, I think, about 12 registered students in it, but there's room for a few more to liven things up.
I got to go, but thank you very much for storytelling.
Thanks, Hank.
Well, Dr. Krause, just maybe two quick last questions here that were asked. One, where can we see your published, and when we can see your published poems, or at least the first one? I think that was the initial question was for the first one.
The first one's in the mill, so to speak. It'll be published, I think, within the next 2 months. It's been accepted at a magazine on the mainland. Outermost Sport is out there. You know, I write these things and start sending them out, and it's like fishing. Not hunting at all, like fishing. You just put your bait out there, and maybe some editor somewhere will will scoop it up. You know. So.
Maybe one last one here. How has surfing affected or influenced your teaching career, and how you engage our student community?
Well, that's an interesting question, and the storytelling could go on and on about that. I've been surfing for probably 20 years longer than I've been a teacher, which is to say that through most of my teaching career, I've been a surfer. Well, pardon me, all of my teaching career. I still go surfing occasionally, but I've quit calling it surfing per se. I call it paddling out, because I don't catch many waves. I do enjoy being out there, and occasionally I'll get away, but the paddling out and paddling around is where it's at. But I have to say, though, through the 1960s and 70s, I think that missionary sensibility that surfing was somehow anti-work, you know, and it was pretty common sensibility here in Honolulu that, oh, you wouldn't want to hire a surfer because when the surf comes up, guess what? That person's going surfing and they won't show up for work. And I know it's a common story, and I'm afraid it's probably true a lot of the time. Most of the very busy surfers I know of get jobs as busboys and working in the restaurant industry in the evening so they can surf all day. And but for me, it was always a matter of, you know, how do I balance the two? And the years I spent, I mentioned earlier, the years I spent living on the beach on the North Shore were always interesting because I was the odd guy commuting into the university for grad school and then later to work at Chaminade. And or in the 1990s when I was living out on the North Shore, I was living right on the water, literally, and friends would come by and check the surf in the middle of the day, and I would be grading papers or working on an article or something and say, "Oh, Kraus, we got to go surfing. Look at those great waves." And I said, "Listen, I've already been out. I've done my thing. Sorry, I've got to work." But there's always pull, you know, and at a certain point, the pull to go surfing, I think, has to transform into the will to get some work done and have a good enough life that you can actually have time to buy a board or have the money to buy a board and a car to get to the waves. But believe me, for surfers and for myself included, when I was young, that the surfing part of this was more or less at the center. So any work that I was going to do had to be oriented to getting my fair share of the waves. And I know there was a point where I had an option to stay on the mainland, and I wanted to come back here, but most of my family had already moved back to the mainland, and so I had to make a decision. And I think the surfing probably was a really big part of my decision to come back here. From where was I then? I was in Connecticut. I was in New London, Connecticut in those days.
What a journey, Dr. Kraus. I want to respect everyone's time. I know we just went a little over, and I just want to say thank you guys for hanging on. And finally, of course, Dr. Kraus, for your time and sharing your joy with us, and such an interesting and great topic. I know we could, especially any surfers that's on here, we probably could spend the next hour just talking about, just talk story about all the good things that we've experienced, the joy that we've experienced out in the ocean. But what I want to do is, Dr. Kraus, what's a great way to maybe get in touch with you, especially if they're interested in the surf studies program or anything? What's the best way to get in contact or stay in
Drop
contact?
me an email, jkraus@chaminade.edu, and that's the best way. We'll get you hooked into that course if that's what you want to do, is join in our discussions and reading lists and all that. I think just to talk another little bit about the course itself, because it's I like to call it an inaugural course. I guess at some point I was overcome with ideas of inaugurations and such, but I'm really not sure what the course is going to become. I see the way these kinds of courses have worked at a couple of other places. And I know the one that gets taught at, I think it's Woodward Community College, is much more oriented to being in the water and training people to be lifeguards and learning how to run jet skis and things like that. The one in San Diego is much more oriented to tourism and looking at the effect of surfing on tourism and looking at the surfing industry and testing products, new surfing products and that sort of thing. There's one in Cornwall, England, that seems actually fairly well balanced by my lights. But we have an interesting place here because of where we are geographically and where we are relative to the really deep tradition of surfing here in the island. And, part of me is honored to be able to do this, but there's a lot of work to be done. There really is a lot of work to be done in protecting shorelines and surfing spots. I mean, this morning's paper had an article about the plans to change the shoreline in Waikiki that will no doubt have an effect on the surfing areas in Waikiki. Through the course, we'll go into a lot more of that sort of struggle. Oh, and by the way, I've got another poem. I'm not going to read it now. It's about seawalls and diminishing real estate values. Yeah, that's actually could be subject for a poem, but those are big subjects that we have that are very specific to Hawaii, and we hold very dear in a lot of ways. But at the same time, people elsewhere are going to learn from them, and vice versa. If in the area of ecotourism, if you were to start talking to Pacific Islanders, particularly about, well, what are the prospects for having surf tourism in their island, on their island? They might not be as happy as you would think about the prospects. And I know, I've read and heard stories actually quite recently about people going to work on surf camps in Samoa and being very, very unhappy about the way the local population was being treated and the way in which the surf camp proprietors, who were Australians, not Samoans, were kind of running roughshod over the local culture. Not a new story when it comes to surfing and local cultures. And that's why that book I mentioned earlier by Isaiah Walker, I think is so important, because it begins to examine Waikiki's, the model of these cultural interactions as they've emerged in Waikiki, particularly. So there's a lot we can learn from the way it's happened in other places and vice versa.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Kraus. All good stuff, all joyful things, and we just wanted to keep this going and ride this wave of surf studies, and how very fortunate we are in our beautiful islands to have it so close and readily available. And I think, even during the pandemic, just how many more people are reaching out and going into the water. There's a whole, discussion we could have about that. And I'm just going to put out there as well. And I spoke to a number of you guys, but within campus ministry and talking even with Jim about this possibility of an experiential program for students in our community here to go out and into the surf, I think could be a really good thing. And so stay tuned for that. There's a number of people that are interested, and we spoke a bit with some students on this thing. We're going to call it Surf and Seek. And it's an opportunity to have the discussion kind of like we've done here with Jim, and talking a little bit about the history, the culture of what does surfing mean for people, and that connection that people also have. And then at the same time, be able to go do that, and experience it for themselves, and then have some kind of discussion and reflection of that. I think that's an opportunity we may be able to do here pretty soon, along with all the protocols and safety of everything that's going on. So say a prayer for that, and we'll keep people posted. I think it could be a really good thing. I'm going to turn things over to Rhea, our campus minister. She's just going to quickly share some upcoming events that are going to go on, the next upcoming Share the Joys as well. And we'll close in prayer, and that'll be it for our time. So Rhea, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm on mute. Oh, wait. Okay. Can you guys see that? The announcements? Okay, great. Just reminders for campus. Wanted to make sure everyone understands that when they come to campus, they are understandable of the COVID reminders. Just coming up, so tomorrow for CSPB, they have the virtual escape room. It's from 4:45 to 6 p.m. via Zoom. So if you still are interested, please check out the link or the QR code. Opportunities Fair Part 2, since we didn't have Part 1 today, it's moved to next Monday. Opportunities Fair for the departments will be on Friday, and it's going to be in the Zubarano Lawn and Henry Courtyard. So please come check it out. All the departments should be out there from 12:20 to 1:30. That's this Friday. And then also on Friday is Movie on the Lawn. That's hosted by CSPB. There's going to be food and mats are going to be provided. I'm not sure what the movie is, but I think they're going to do a vote that evening. So definitely check it out, students, if you are available to come. And again, mask protocols, anything, just make sure you guys are following the safety protocols. Just so you know, we have the health and wellness kickoff with Sean and P, and this is going to be Monday, February 8th from 12:30 to 1:30. That's the room meeting ID number. So if you want to get fit, this is a great opportunity. I'm not sure if there's any spots, but if you want to check out the link or the QR code. And you will receive a free resistant band, which is going to be really fun. So please check it out. Also during that same time, every Mondays, we are hosting a Lectio Divina. This is a great opportunity for students and faculty, staff, anybody to come together for breaking open the word and doing a little bit of scripture. So if you just need time for prayer, definitely come check that out. It's going to be every Monday during the lunch hour at 12:30, and it will be the same Zoom room number every time. Fourth nights, it's also every Monday at 6:30 via Zoom. That's the Zoom room number. It's going to be the same every Monday. All are welcome for students to come and, share faith and build community. We are starting up small groups for the Easter season. So we are looking for small group leaders. If you're interested in small group or small group, leading a small group, we're going to have an information meeting for the leaders next Tuesday at 6 p.m. via Zoom. And that's what small groups going to be like. It's going to be virtual. Our next Share the Joy next Wednesday is going to be with Dr. Glenn Medeiros, same Zoom room number at 4 p.m. And he's going to talk on the joy of educational leadership. And Dr. Glenn is the St. Louis School President and CEO. And then we have some workshops coming up. I'm not sure there's some workshops, please check it out, but it starts next week, February 10th on Wednesday. If you want to sign up, please click on the QR code. not click, sorry, scan the QR codes. These are the Marinus Leadership Workshops that's going to start February 12th. If you are interested, please make sure you guys register and that you email mlc@chaminade.edu or check their Instagram at the CUH Marinus Leadership. Also happening February 18 and 25. 25 is the Intramural Volleyball. So if you are interested, please check OSAL out. That's going to be really fun. And then just so you guys know, we have mass 10 and 6 p.m. now the 6 p.m. evening mass. If you want to join us, please RSVP through Eventbrite for 6:30 p.m. You don't have to. And then we also live stream. And if you're seeking to get your sacraments or if you want to be a part of the liturgy, please email us, let us know. Yeah, that's for you guys. And then this is OSAL's Instagram, Facebook, social media. Please follow them all over, as well as us. This is our social media. This is where you can find out all our information. We also have a TikTok now. So we'll share that out soon. And thank you for joining us. That's all the announcements that I have.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Rhea. And thank you again, everyone, for staying for an extended Share the Joy. We invite you always to be a part of this series. This is something that we started from last semester, offering, in this time of pandemic, stories of hope, encouragement, and we hope joy. So thank you again for coming. And we want to share that same joy with others. And if anyone's ever interested in coming up with a presentation or knows anyone that would like to do that for our community, we'd be happy to take on and bring them in. So Dr. Kraus, thank you so much again. We wish you all a very blessed time during 2021, and we just thank God for the good things that's going to come and the good things that we've already experienced. So thank you guys again, and take care. Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
I'm like super excited to get my portal on my cup.